Hey guys, John V from PhoneArena here. You're watching our video comparison between the HTC One M9 and the HTC One M8. HTC had a year to improve upon the shortcomings of the M8 last year. So with the M9, they have a pretty similar device in terms of the design, but of course, being a newer handset, it's greeted with newer specs and newer features. So the question that remains is whether or not, how much better is the M9 over the M8? These two are gorgeous looking smartphones. HTC knows how to design devices. So with the M8, they established something really impressive. And of course, they transitioned that over to the M9. The M9 sees some new improvements to design, but for the most part, retains its predecessor design aesthetics and design language. So they're both made of metal, all metal. So you have that sturdy feel, substantial feel as well. But there are some improvements made to the M9, which are large. For starters, you now have the power button relocated to the right side of the phone, so it's a lot more accessible. It also features a new scratch-resistant finish, which makes it less prone to being slippery than the M8. And finally, it has also a new dual-tone finish, so you have an accent color around the sides of the phone with the M9, which is a good contrast to the silver. But with that, it makes a gap around the sides, which gives it a little bit of a sharper feel, whereas with the M8, it has more of a seamless look just because the edges are rounded. But for the most part, they're both very meticulously designed smartphones, which have a lot of appeal to them. The biggest design change with the M9, of course, over the M8 is in the rear with their cameras. Gone is the 4-megapixel ultra pixel camera of the M8 and its dual camera system, replaced instead with a more formidable 20-megapixel camera. But the ultra pixel camera has been made as the front-facing camera in M9, whereas with the M8, it's just only a 5-megapixel front-facing snapper. Other commonalities between two include things like their HTC boom sound speakers, their dual front-firing ones. The M9 benefits by having Dolby Audio surround support. They both have micro SD card storage. You have also IR blasters placed on the top edge of both phones. And on bottom sides, you still have their micro USB ports and 3.5mm headset jacks. When you look at these specs, they have the same display, a 5-inch 1920 by 1080 Super LCD 3 display. So when it comes to detail, there's not one that's going to be better than the other just because you have the same pixel density count on both. They're exquisite, they're sharp, and they're great for things like surfing the web. But what's different though are the other qualities of the displays. Now with the M9, they improved the brightness output. It's slightly stronger at 508 nits versus 490 nits with the M8. But what's really apparent here is just the color temperature of the M9. Unfortunately though, it doesn't make necessarily an improvement. It's now at 8100 Kelvin versus the 7200 Kelvin color temperature of the M8. Now the target reference value is usually 6500, so the M8 is closer to reaching that target value. So with the higher 8100 Kelvin color temperature of the M9, it exhibits a more colder look with the display, so the whites tend to look a little bit more on the bluish side. Being the newer phone and all, the M9 benefits from having the most up-to-date HTC Sense experience. So it's version 7.0 versus 6.0. Now, of course, you're going to get some newer features and a subtle design change in the visual department with the M9 and Sense 7.0. You can see that with the widgets right here, the clock widget. But for the most part, both are still very modern looking and there's a lot of attention to detail with the design. You have things like HTC Blink Feed for your social networking aggregation service, but the M9 Sense 7.0 experience is a step ahead, of course, just because you have a higher degree of personalization thanks to the various themes that you could install and download with it. So you have more of a personalized element with that. On top of that, they both share some other similar software features like the various motion launch gestures you could turn on the display by tapping on the screens. or you could launch the camera apps. But with the M9, you have this new HTC Sense Home widget, which is really good if you're a type of person who likes organization, just because it can tell when you're home, you're out, or you're at work. And with that, it provides us with some very useful applications based on our usage. So let's say, for example, at home, you do a lot of listening to music, you'll see that. If you're out, you're going to see Google Maps application recommended there. And finally, when you're at work, you're going to have things like the email application at your disposal. So of course, the M9 benefits just because it's the newer product, and we do see some evolutionary improvements with Sense 7.0. Honestly, you'd hardly notice it just looking at the reaction of both handsets just by navigating across their home screens, but the M9 has the newer processor. It's a 64-bit base octa-core Qualcomm Snapdragon 810 chip with 3 GB of RAM. In comparison, the older M8 has a quad-core Qualcomm Snapdragon 801 chip with 2 GB of RAM. Like I said here, just for basic tasks such as navigating across the interface, opening up applications, you'd hardly notice the difference between the two. Both are exquisitely responsive with the performances, but when it comes to game, we do notice just a little bit more finesse going with the M9, and again, that's attributed to its newer chipset. So last year, HTC talked big about the performance of its ultra-pixel camera in the M8, but of course, in reality, it proved to be underwhelming with the results. So they went back to the drawing board and decided to go with a more sizable 20 megapixel camera with the M9 versus the 4 megapixel ultra-pixel camera of the M8. Now, the biggest problem we had with the M8 was details, but the M9 fixes all that. There's no issue whatsoever. When you look at their outdoor shots, between the two, the M9 produces more detail. So it's better at being able to crop photos afterwards without losing a whole lot of quality in the process. So you have some versatility in doing that. But under lower lighting conditions, it's kind of strange that the M8 actually performs better than the M9, and we see it just because the M9 is just a smudgy mess. These details are out the door. You actually have a sharper look with the M8 just because of the superior low lighting performance of its ultra pixel camera. So we're kind of disappointed that the M9 failed to meet at least that criteria in being a decent camera under lower light. When it comes to their front-facing cameras, we actually, see the advantages of the ultra-pixel camera in the M9. It just takes sharper-looking photos. And finally, when it comes to video capture, of course, the M9 benefits from having 4K capture. But when we look at their 1080p samples, again, it's just really strange that the M8 performs better. Generally speaking, it has a sharper overall quality, which we prefer, and it does perform also better under lower lighting conditions. Even though the M9 has the newer version of Sense, the music players between the two aren't different at all. They're identical. They have the same meticulous design language, very dynamic looking, and you even have a cool equalizer option when you're playing songs. Now, as you can tell, they both have dual front-firing speakers, and actually, it's the M8's pair that produces the stronger tone of 75.2 decibels, which is a little bit better than the 72.8 decibel mark of the M9 set. But when you enable Dolby Audio Surround with the M9, it gives it a stronger, more vibrant fidelity than the M8, and especially made known when you're watching videos, just because it has a level of depth that you quite don't get with the M8. But the two are pretty fantastic when it comes to watching videos. It's a win with both phones when it comes to call quality. You're not going to be disappointed. They have powerful speakers, earpieces, voices are distinctive and clear on both ends of the line, so no problems whatsoever. What's really surprising is the battery life. Now, the M9 has the larger capacity. It's actually a 2840 milliamp hour battery, which is a little bit larger than the 2600 milliamp hour battery in its predecessor in the M8. But strangely enough, it's actually the M8 that has the longer battery life. Now, in our own battery benchmark test, the M8 achieves a mark of 7 hours and 12 minutes, which easily bests the 6 hours and 25 minute tally of the M9. Ultimately, the thing left unanswered is whether or not you should pick up either the M9 or the M8. Now, of course, there are some advantages going with the M9. It makes some new improvements over the M8, while at the same time, it tosses in some new features and experiences as well. But it also comes with some of its displeasing qualities, like how bad the low light performance of the camera and the lower battery life of the handset. But besides that, you gotta think about pricing. You could pick up the M8 for a lot cheaper nowadays with a contract, whereas with the M9, you'll probably need to fork over $200 with a 2-year contract for it. So if you're looking to save money and you could live with some of the last generation specs of the M8, it's not bad of an option. It's still a beautiful phone, it performs well. But if you want the latest and greatest, of course, go with the M9. So if you guys want to learn more about either device, you can check out our website, PhoneArena.com. It's John V. Thanks for watching.